And then a light bulb came on over my head, like in cartoons when a character gets an idea or an answer to a question. Damn it, my third child really wasn't mine. He was another man's biological daughter. I was on the phone with a genealogygurus.com representative asking why my daughter's DNA test had not been processed after 10 weeks. I gave her the test as an extra Christmas gift, and I gave the rep the appropriate numbers so they could track it down. After about 5 minutes of holding, he returned to the line and assured that the test had been processed. Additionally, it was a matter of confidentiality between the company and the person actually submitting the test, and he could not provide me with more information. But if you've processed it, why isn't it reflected in my DNA matches? I asked excitedly. Sir, there are several reasons why your daughter may not match your DNA, but I am not at liberty to discuss this particular test with you, he replied in a somewhat annoyed tone. And that's when the light bulb came on. Obviously, the number one reason she doesn't show up to my matches is because she doesn't fit. I ended the conversation stunned. I remember pressing the red end call button. Then I remember starting to cry. I woke up a few minutes later, curled up in the fetal position on the couch in the family room. I still had 15 minutes left before my lunch break, so I called my daughter, who was probably also on her lunch break since she was working in the same time zone as me. I know she usually curled up with a book at the table for lunch, so I wasn't worried about getting in the way. She answered the phone on the first ring. "Hey, Dad, what's wrong?" she said somewhat warily. "Pumpkin, you know I love you and trust you completely, but I don't know what's going on with the DNA test." I called the genealogy gurus on the phone, and they told me it was processed about 2 weeks ago. There was a sound of air being sucked in from her side, followed by silence for at least 10 seconds. "I know, Dad. We need to talk, but I can't do it here and now. Call me tonight, and don't be in the room with your mom when you call." I was in a fog as I returned to my office, and I have to admit that I didn't give my boss a productive day at the engineering firm where I worked. There were so many things in my head, so many questions, and the thought that my little girl is not my little girl. Since I am such an analyst, I knew that I had to prioritize my thoughts and then work on the problems one by one. I was the VP of engineering at Sisyphus Electronics for a reason. And at that point, I knew the best thing for me was to treat my personal problems like design problems and solve them in an orderly manner. The old man, Dwayne Sisyphus, taught me this himself when he hired me directly from Purdue University to work for his then-founded company. With Dwayne at the helm and me never too far from his right-hand man, Sisyphus grew into an industry leader, and we both made good profits. I made great money, had great benefits, and worked with great smart people. And then it got even better when I went home in the evening, where I had a beautiful, sexy wife and 3 wonderful children. Subsequently, the children grew up, left home, got married, and started having children of their own. At first, it was a little lonely at home, like empty nesters, but we found something to do, and I felt like the loneliness revitalized us as a couple again. But as I reflected back on the last month of my life, several small incidents stood out to me, including Marissa's phone call to my wife about 2 weeks ago. On Tuesday night, we were both sitting in the family room watching TV when Tracy's phone rang. She looked at it and told me it was Marissa, and then she answered. The conversation lasted about 5 minutes, with Tracy answering almost exclusively yes and no, and I could see tears welling up in the corners of her eyes. When she hung up, I asked if everything was okay, and she told me that Marissa's cat was having some health problems. "There's nothing to worry about," she said, although I noticed that she seemed a little nervous around me. I thought it was a little strange that she took Marissa's cat's health so personally. This phone call was probably when Marissa found out. Tracy didn't know that I sent Marissa a test. I didn't think it was even worthwhile. Marissa was the only one of the 3 children who was interested in genealogy, so I bought a kit online and forwarded it to her. I have been researching my family roots for many years, and I really enjoyed the DNA research part of it. I thought it would be great for Marissa to get a test too. Obviously, I couldn't be more wrong about this. When I got home, I did my best not to act differently towards Tracy. even though I was seething inside. Save one problem at a time, one problem at a time, I repeated to myself. I met Tracy at Purdue my sophomore year. We didn't meet until senior year, but we've been inseparable ever since, or so I thought. We got married a year after graduating from college, 31 years ago, and to this day I would tell anyone that it was the best decision I ever made. At 54, she is still beautiful, and despite having 3 children, she works out regularly and has the body of a woman in her mid-30s. She is fun and funny, and to this day I was looking forward to spending the rest of my life with this woman. Around 8, I told Tracy that I needed to call the old man about a project we were working on and excused myself from the room. I actually grabbed my jacket and went outside to the porch swing so I could talk without worrying about Tracy's hearing. And then I called Marissa. Marissa answered the first call and sounded completely confused. "Sorry, Dad. I know I should tell you sooner, but Mom asked me not to say anything until she has a chance to talk to you," she blurted out before I could say hello. "I'm not mad at you. Calm down," I said more calmly. "I don't blame you for anything. You are a victim just like me." I could hear her breathing heavily over the phone. I knew it was killing her. "Reese, I want you to know that this doesn't change anything between us at all. I'm still your father and you're still my pumpkin. I've always given you kids all my love, and after all this time, I'm not going to stop now, assuming you don't want me to stop." At that moment, she fell apart, babbling almost incoherently into the phone. "I love you, Dad. I don't want anyone but you. This is my pumpkin. Look, I don't want to put you in the middle, but you are my best source of information about DNA. We will not discuss other things so that you are not in the middle, but I need to know if you had a DNA match." "Yes, Dad, I am," she sighed. "Amanda Anderson was my half-sister. Mandy, Uncle George and Aunt Ginny's Mendy." "I'm sorry, Dad," she said quietly. "It's not your fault. You never have to apologize to me," I said more calmly. This meant that George Anderson, Uncle George to my children, Appellate Court Judge George Anderson to most of the rest of the world, was Marissa's biological father. Damn it. This meant that my wife entertained her boss when he was an attorney at the law firm of Gooey Howe and Associates. This meant at least 25 years ago, given that Marissa was 24 years old. By then, Tracy was his administrator. A few years later, he left the firm to become a state judge, moving to the state capitol before his career really took off. For her part, Tracy did not leave with George, choosing to stay with Guy Howe and finally ending up as an office manager. But over the few years that George and Tracy worked together, he and his wife Ginny became such good friends that our children still call them Auntie and Uncle, and their children still call Tracy and me the same. And a few times when I was on a business trip, Tracy and the kids came with George and Ginny for a few days at their lake house. Oh my gosh, the kids even talked a few times about Aunt Ginny taking them here and there. No mention of Uncle George or Mom being with them, and I didn't even think twice about it. I must have walked away at that point because I heard Marissa calling me, "Daddy? Dad?" "Sorry, I got lost in my thoughts. Thanks for your help, kid. Say hello to Drew." "Wait, Dad, what are you gonna do?" It was a legitimate question, but I didn't have a good answer, so I just told her the truth. "Not sure, kid." "Well, Dad, don't rush out and do something incredibly stupid. A little stupid is okay, but don't get yourself arrested or anything." I hadn't thought about shooting Tracy until that moment, but I had promised Marissa that I wouldn't get arrested, so I guess that took shooting out of the equation. I never break promises to my children. Convincing Marissa of our relationship was my #1 priority, and finding out who Tracy's partner in crime was my #2. Challenge #3 would be to proceed with the divorce after finding a new lawyer, since my current one is with the firm that Tracy works for. It definitely didn't work. Once I've had a good sit-down with the lawyer, I'll be dealing with the soon-to-be ex-Mrs. Clark Walters. It was cold at home. Whenever we were together, Tracy talked like a magpie. I think from pure nerves. She seemed to be trying very hard to keep me happy, suggesting that it might lessen the impact when I found out. Don't know. But there was definitely distance between us, and she wasn't going to be the one to break the ice. About a week later, I met with the lawyer, and when he found out that my wife was the office manager at Gui Howe, he got a real nervous look on his face. I moved on to the next lawyer on my list, a woman in her 20s who just smiled when I remembered that Tracy was the manager of Guy Howe's office. This is what I was looking for, someone who would not be intimidated when one of Guy's great lawyers came forward to represent my wife. I laid out what little I knew about the fraud scenario, starting, of course, with finding out that my youngest child was not biologically mine, and discovering that he was Judge Anderson's child. "Appellate Judge Anderson?" asked my lawyer, Marie Robinette. "Exactly," I replied, looking at her face to see if I needed to find another lawyer. "That should be good," was all she said, and then we started discussing the breakdown of finances. Since we had good jobs with pensions and good benefits, Marie suggested that we simply split our total assets in half, keep our own pensions, and sell the house. This would leave us both in good shape, although I would be better off with more income and a better pension. Unless you really want to crush her over infidelity, over a child, or just a general lack of respect," she quickly added, waiting for a brief moment, as if she might just jump to the conference table to make amends for the wrong she had done to me. "Offense. I'm sure we'll settle, but I don't want to hurt her financially," I replied. "What about the judge? Are we going to prosecute him for anything? Because if we do, it becomes much more risky and increases your score significantly." "The judge is my problem, and I will take care of it as I see fit," I said sharply, apparently too briefly. "Got it," she replied. "If she doesn't fight it, it could take 6 months," Marie noted. "If she fights this, we could be talking for over a year." "I don't have any dates yet, so take your time and get it right," I told her. With Task 3 completed, it's time to complete Task 4, debriefing. I waited another week to see if Chairman Tracy would blow up. Saturday night was our usual date night, then we would come home, watch a movie, and make love. But Saturday sex was always special because we went to bed early so we had plenty of time to play. We were both usually exhausted when we finished and would just cuddle with each other before getting up to clean up. However, we didn't date for 2 weeks or have sex for as long because I just couldn't bring myself to do it after I found out about the affair and Marissa. Tracy never even questioned it, another sign that she knew I knew, but she was really good at abstinence. However, this had to end. I took her to a nice French restaurant, and we shared a bottle of wine and even had some great desserts. She was happier than I had seen her in weeks. Then, when we got home, I carefully took off her coat, led her to the kitchen table, pulled out a chair for her, and said those famous words, "We need to talk." Tracy kind of half smiled at me as I poured myself a Jack Daniels over the ice and offered her something from the liquor cabinet, which she cautiously declined. I put the drink on the table and looked her straight in the eyes. "It was a long time ago, Clark. George and I haven't slept together in about 20 years. Can't we just leave this as a mistake from the ancient past and leave it at that?" Well, I have to admit that I was glad that she wasn't trying to say that the DNA test was wrong, but was trying to make it easier by saying that it was so long ago that it doesn't matter anymore. Indeed. "Okay, the last time you had sex was about 20 years ago. When did you start having sex, how often, and why did you finally stop? I want to know everything. But first I need to know if baby number 1 and baby number 2 are his too." "No, Clark. Barry and Katie are yours. I didn't even sleep with George until a year after Katie was born. The affair lasted about 3 years at the beginning. Then we stopped when George decided to leave the firm and move. He waited about a year after we stopped to submit our first position to the judge because he wanted to make sure the background check would show he was clean. And then we only made love a few times at the lake house when Ginny innocently took in all the kids for fun. During the day, Ginny also didn't know at the time, although George eventually told her, and all 3 of us later had a peaceful conversation during which George and I promised her that we wouldn't date again. "Why didn't you ever tell me or try a peaceful plan with me?" I asked sharply. Tracy wiped her hands on her sleeves and replied, "I knew I could never tell you. You'll divorce me instantly, and I definitely didn't want that. I loved you. I still love you. You probably love George better, I said. Start and stop on his orders without thinking about me. I was your backup option. No, Clark, I love you with all my heart, she begged. No, you loved him with all your heart. You loved him so much that you gave him up so he could pursue his career dreams, knowing all along that I was your backup plan. You may have loved some things about me at that moment, but you knew that I absolutely adore the ground you walked on, and you counted on it and our family to help you lose him. Tracy looked down at her knees. It really hurt, and I knew I could handle it. What about Marissa? Obviously, he was dealing with you without protection, and you should have known where this could lead, and it did. I just thought that since you both have brown hair, brown eyes, and fair skin, no one would ever guess whose child she is. And I knew that you would have no reason to think that she was not yours. When she ended up looking like me anyway, I didn't have to worry about it until you went and sent her that damn DNA test. I honestly never knew about it. So it's my fault? I asked incredulously. No. George and I discussed this possibility, but I told him that he shouldn't worry because you have similar physical characteristics. I haven't heard from him for at least a couple of years since they were at Marissa and Drew's wedding 2 years ago. Well, no matter who knows what, Marissa is still mine as far as I'm concerned, and that's what I told her. I'm on the birth certificate, I raised her, I love her, she's mine. George better not have any ideas about this, and if he calls, you better tell him so. And by the way, I will do a DNA test on the other 2 children as soon as possible. I need to know for my own peace. Clark, Tracy hissed. I told you that they are yours. And you expect me to believe you? Why? I snapped. More than anything, Tracy was completely taken aback by my new lack of trust. What the hell did she expect? But I know that she was also very worried that I would tell the other 2 children about her infidelity. Nobody wants to look bad in front of their own children. So how often did you 2 do this and where? Finish the story, at least for me, I chided. We didn't plan this, Clark. It just came out. We spent so much time working together, and then we became friends, and it just kind of grew from there. He was kind, considerate, witty, funny, passionate. You know the man, and we connected on a deeper level. But since we had spouses whom we both loved, we kept this to a relative minimum and moved the meeting places, usually outside the city. No, we never met either here or at his house. It would be wrong on several levels. But that didn't stop you 2 from having fun at the lake house a few times after the affair supposedly ended and Ginny went out with the kids, I reasoned out loud. No, it's not like that, she practically whispered to me. But I swear to you, we haven't been intimate since then. And Jenny knows all this and has forgiven you both? I asked, shaking my head in disbelief. Yes, I told you. I don't think I can, I blurted, my voice hoarse with intense emotion. We know what we did was wrong, Clark. But it's been 20 years, and you haven't been harmed in any way by this while this has been happening. And can't we just go back to the way things were a few weeks ago? You were my loving man. I am your loving wife. Nothing should change. But everything has changed, Tracy, I said. I spent the better part of 3 weeks thinking about what I did wrong when you fell in love with another man, and wondering if I would ever trust you completely again, let alone trust you that much. To stay married to you. I gave you my heart completely, and you put it in your pocket and took it out when it was convenient for you. This should not be a marriage of convenience. It should be a full-time love marriage. At this point, Tracy began to cry. I hate it when she does this and usually tries to console her, but this time it was different. I went into the family room and turned on the TV, leaving her at the kitchen table. That night we slept in the same bed, but for the first time in a while we didn't sleep opposite each other. I moved as far away from her as I could on the queen-size bed and stopped her from sliding towards me when she entered. The look on her face was both shock and pain. I didn't care. Tracy cooked us a delicious breakfast on Sunday morning, and while we were eating, I brought up the topic of divorce. This novel happened more than 20 years ago. You didn't even know about it, for God's sake. It's done. Now let's just get on with life. She practically screamed at me. An error remains incorrect no matter how long ago it was, I shouted back at her. You deceived me. You lied to me. You deceived me and you broke my trust. These are not time-sensitive issues." I got up from the table, leaving half a plate of food, and went to mow the lawn. That was the last time I spoke to Tracy until Wednesday afternoon, when she told me that Ginny Anderson would be joining us this coming weekend. Needless to say, I wasn't happy, but Ginny was a long-time dear friend and had endured the same kind of deception that I had, so I decided I had to talk to her. Ginny showed up at 6 on Friday evening after a 2-hour drive from her house. She didn't take George with her. Tracy made a stuffed steak with mashed potatoes, and I grabbed a couple of bottles of Merlot to go with it. The conversation was light and friendly during dinner, then we went to the family room with our wine glasses for what I thought was the main event. Ginny started talking about the affair as if it were a historical topic, very sterile and quiet. But as the conversation continued, she became more emotional, and both she and Tracy had tears in their eyes. When George told me about the affair, I believed it was over for a couple of years, and he promised me it would never happen again, Ginny said. However, I have to admit that at first I was devastated, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that since it was over before I even knew it, I believed that I was not affected too much. And since I knew that Ginny was not some kind of gold digger, I apparently understood how this could happen. George's personality is kind of magnetic, isn't it? Although I didn't know about Marissa until a few weeks ago when everyone seemed to know about it. I really regret this, Clark. Ginny never mentioned the several times Tracy and George interacted after the end of the main affair at the Andersons' lake house. I wondered to myself if they even told her about this. I didn't bother going there. But I did think that George might be a great lawyer because Jenny almost apologized for George's affair instead of being upset about it. Unfortunately for Tracy, I'm not as determined as Ginny, and I'm not as keen on her oratory because I wasn't willing to give Tracy and George the gap that Ginny had, even if their romance ended 20 years ago. I'm just remembering what my life would have been like if I had left him and how things would have been so different for me and the girls, she continued. They say you should always think about whether your life would be better or worse if you left your wife, and I just know mine would be worse. Thank you for sharing this with me, Ginny. This is definitely food for thought. I will definitely have to take this into account, although there are several factors that I have to take into account, in particular the fact that, unlike you, I was not told about the affair. I found out completely by accident. Tracy knew it was wrong when she did it, and she knew what my reaction would be. So she decided it was probably for the best of all concerned if I never found out and just lived in ignorant bliss. And that's what it would be, except for the test. So 20 years later, I found out that the center of my world loved another man and was intimate with him, and then became a saint and abandoned him for his career, returning to me by default. Is that so, Tracy? My wife didn't say anything while Jenny was talking. She just sat quietly while Ginny told her story. She kept looking at me, trying to gauge my reaction. She didn't know that I knew she was watching, so I sat there listlessly while Ginny talked to drive Tracy a little crazy. My reaction to Ginny's story was not what Tracy wanted, or Ginny for that matter. They looked at each other with pain in their eyes. I shook my head, went into the kitchen, poured myself another glass of wine, returned to the family room and turned on the big screen, showing them both that I was done talking for the night. The women took the hint and went into the living room, where I heard them talking quietly. When whatever I was watching was finished, I turned off the TV, poked my head into the living room, said goodnight, and walked up the stairs to our bedroom. Ginny cornered me alone in the family room on Saturday and told me we needed to talk. I had no idea where Tracy was, but I said okay, and we went into the living room and sat on 2 chairs in the corner. Clark, I understand your pain. I really do. But not forgiving Tracy and breaking up with her would be a terrible mistake for both of you, Ginny began. You love her and she loves you. That should be all that matters. The rest is history, and it would be terrible for the two of you to spend the rest of your lives apart because of what happened 20 years ago. If I can forgive George, then you can definitely forgive Tracy. I honestly don't know if I can, Ginny. As I said yesterday, I wasn't told about this affair like you were. They didn't tell me because she knew it was wrong, and I wouldn't forgive her then. Why should I forgive her now? She deceived me for 20 years. She had an affair for several years and deceived me for another 20 years. How can I forgive her? How can I ever trust her again? I shook my head, stood up, and left the room, passing Tracy in the hallway. She was well aware of the conversation I had just had with Ginny, and she could see by the expression on my face that I had not moved an inch. Saturday dinner was very quiet. The women tried to talk. I had none of this. I didn't say 3 words throughout the entire meal. With a quick thank you, I grabbed my jacket and left, telling the couple I'd be in Malone, my favorite place for a quiet drink. When I approached Malone, Ronnie, the woman who owned the bar, was arguing with other customers in the back corner. Instead of taking a seat at the bar, as I usually do when I go in, I sat at a table by myself, feeling miserable and apparently looking even worse. Marnie, the bartender, came up to me with my regular Crown Black on ice and said I looked like my dog just died. Sort of, but nothing as important as my dog. Just my marriage. I chuckled weakly. Marnie walked up to Ronnie and whispered something in her ear. Ronnie apologized to the customers at the far end and came over to sit across from me at my table. "Okay, Superman, spill," she said. Ronnie was about my age, a somewhat large woman of Irish descent with freckles and red hair that she wore like a badge. Ronnie called me Superman because of my name, said it reminded her of Clark Kent, and swore to everyone that even though I was a good guy with a good job, she wouldn't want to see me get mad. We always laughed about it. I've been coming to Malone for 20 years, sometimes with Tracy, sometimes without, sometimes for food, sometimes just for a drink. Ronnie could read people, including me, quite well. She was like the sister I never had. "Tracy and I are done," I began. I hadn't told anyone about it by that point, and I have to admit, it felt good to finally get it out of my mind. I found out she cheated on me with her boss about 20 years ago. Not once, not several times, but for 4 damn years. My youngest, Marissa, belongs to him, and she thinks that since it was so long ago and I didn't know when it happened, I should just accept it and move on. She says she loves me, always has, and doesn't want to leave. "That little cheater," Ronnie exclaimed. "How dare she? You're not just going to give it up and let her stay, are you?" It was nice to hear that Ronnie agreed with me. I really appreciated her common sense, nonsensical way of looking at things, and if she thought differently, it would definitely make me reconsider my position. "Listen, Superman, it's a matter of respect, like anything else. I love Tracy. No, I love Tracy. But her deception was not done out of love, and certainly not out of respect. How could she let you think someone else's child was yours all these years?" I explained the matter with Marissa to Ronnie, noting that she really didn't know for sure, but Ronnie would have none of it, noting that denying the child testing was a convenient way of saying he didn't want to know. "Did she ever apologize for the affair or just apologize for hurting you?" This woman was good. "She never apologized for the affair. I don't even think she ever actually apologized for hurting me. I think the only thing she really apologized for was what I found out," I said. "I can't tell you what to do, Superman, but I think she already told you what you need to do. Sorry, Clark, the bar is at your disposal. We will call you a taxi at the end of the night. Give me your keys." I did as I was ordered. The taxi driver brought me to the house at about 2 o'clock in the morning. Tracy greeted us at the door and helped guide me up the stairs to our bedroom. I fell into bed fully dressed. Tracy took off my shoes and socks, and I fell asleep like that. Late Wednesday afternoon, I received a call from my son from the office. He wanted to talk to me about the situation with Tracy. He didn't say it, but apparently Tracy decided she needed to call in the heavy hitters of the kids to get me out of the divorce. My son and I are usually on the same page about most things, but I realized while talking to him that Tracy did a great job, and it paid dividends because he certainly saw her side of this divorce. "Dad, breaking up with Mom would be the stupidest thing you've done since you wore a leisure suit in the 70s, he tried to joke with me. "Seriously, Dad, divorce. For something she did 20 years ago, you didn't even know a few weeks ago. This is the woman you said you loved and wanted to spend your whole life with just a few weeks ago, And now you're ready to give it all up and probably live the rest of your life on your own mistake. Seriously, Dad? First of all, Barry, the mistake she made the first few times she had sex with him. After a few months, it's a solution, not a bug. What would you do if you found out that Linda was cheating on you? I probably would have torn her head off. But you didn't catch her. 20 years have passed. The physical act is over. The deception and lack of respect continue. I replied coldly. Barry, I thought you were smart enough to stay out of this and not take sides. But you obviously jumped in where a child shouldn't, stood between your parents. And why, Barry? I won't change my mind. I'm the aggrieved party here and you're just annoying me. I put this woman on a pedestal. I worshipped the ground she walked on and she knew it. She was never going to tell, and if it weren't for the accident, I would have gone to my grave worshipping her, and she just used me as a second choice when the man she loved most didn't want to marry her. Dad, aren't you being a little dramatic here? I think he was still talking when I hung up. When I walked in the door around 6 p.m., Tracy's was almost done with what smelled like delicious food. She didn't look happy when I told her I wasn't hungry, poured some Jack into a glass, turned on the TV, and sat down in my favorite chair. She came in and asked me what was wrong. Same shit, different day. My wife cheated on me for 4 years, had a baby with another guy, and now my kids are telling me I'm the bad guy here. Do me a favor, call Katie tonight and tell her not to call me tomorrow unless she wants to hook up like Barry. Tracy lowered her eyes. You'd think that 31 years later she'd know that other people don't annoy me on her behalf. What makes you think this divorce won't happen? I said, raising my voice. Not only did you cheat on me for 4 years with another man and have his child, but you replaced me in your heart with him. Can you sit here and tell me that you weren't in love with him, and that if he had asked to break up with me and marry him, you wouldn't have done it? And here's the thing. You may love me, but you are not in love with me. You're in love with him. I'm just a safe backup plan because you always knew you had my heart, and I would do anything for you as long as I thought you were mine. You betrayed me, you deceived me, you disrespected me, and now you are brazenly trying to turn our children against me. This was the last straw, Trace. But no, I won't be cruel to you, especially Jenny, or ruin George's wonderful career as a clean judge. I'll file a case of irreconcilable differences, and we can each keep our own retirement account and share the house and everything else. Tears rolled fast and furious down Tracy's cheeks. And as she stood up from her chair, I threw another thing at her. You still never told me that you regret cheating. Probably because you don't regret it, which is at least honest. The only thing you regret is what I found out, isn't it? I spent the rest of the night hugging my bottle of Jack. I called my lawyer the next day and told her that she needed to get her divorce papers done as soon as possible. She told me I could watch them next Tuesday. She could have them ready to go out on Wednesday and Tracy could submit them on Thursday. I told her to deliver her server to my house that Friday night. I wanted to be there when she was served. So I called Judge George Anderson's office and told his administrator that I needed him to call me back about an important matter. He would know exactly why I was calling, and I knew he would call me back as soon as possible. George looked a little worried when he answered my call about 2 hours later. Yes, he knew exactly why I was calling, although he didn't think he wanted to do it in his office. I completely agreed and told him that I would come to meet him at home with Ginny the following Saturday at 10 a.m. He didn't know that Tracy wouldn't be brought in the night before, although I'm sure he would have known by the time I drove 2 hours to his luxurious home. During dinner at Malone's on Saturday night, Tracy admitted that Ginny had called her and told her about my meeting with George the following Saturday. She wanted to know if I wanted some company during the trip. "This is not a social visit, Tracy," I said. "George and I have some things to talk about. You don't need to be there. You may remember that he is an appellate court judge with an excellent reputation, who may even make the short list for Supreme Court judges one day. If you go over the grant with him, you could be arrested. And besides, you promised me you wouldn't do anything that would harm his career." "That's right. Choose him over me again. But don't worry. I intend to keep my promise. I won't do anything that would remove him from the short list of potential Supreme Court justices. God forbid. The show must go on." After telling the old man in the office about what was going on in my life, I found a couple of hours of personal communication and met with my lawyer to check the divorce papers. I gave her the go-ahead. When I returned to leave, she asked me if I had any plans for Judge George. "Now, why would you worry about it?" I asked, winking at her. "Because I am still handling some criminal cases, and I believe you may need a good lawyer. You engineers don't seem to get too emotional about a lot of things, but I know you're pretty tough and your methodical approach to things scares me." She handed me her card, and I left the office. For the next 3 days, time passed quickly. We were working on a big project in the office, and it allowed me to focus on something other than life. The old man even told me that he was shocked at how focused I was despite the adversity in my life. I told him I was glad that at least something was going well. But on Friday night before I left, I told him about Tracy being served, and I had run into Georgie and warned him that if things went wrong I could end up in jail on Monday. He assured me that he had my back, and the money was bail. We went for a handshake. I came home to another wonderful-smelling meal that Tracy had prepared. She recently outdid herself in trying to get me to focus on her many skills. She truly was a great cook. I almost felt guilty because I knew what would happen after lunch. We ate the food mostly in silence, as we had been doing for the past few weeks, although I made sure to tell her how great the food was. After all, I'm not an ungrateful bastard. Then I helped her wash the dishes. But as we were about to go to the family room for an evening of TV, the doorbell rang. It was almost equal to 7. I knew it wasn't for me, so I didn't move to get it. Tracy gave me a funny look, then walked to the door and opened it. A well-dressed young man was on the porch, and he asked Tracy if she was Tracy Walters. When she answered in the affirmative, he handed her the envelope, said, "You have been served," returned in heels, and left. Tracy didn't move from where she stood, but I could see when her shoulders were shaking, she was crying. I walked past, closed the front door, and led her by the shoulders back to the kitchen table. She looked completely stunned, even though I told her this was going to happen. We sat in silence for what seemed like an eternity, but in reality it was only 5 minutes. Finally she muttered, "You bastard," and ran upstairs to our bedroom. I didn't follow her. The hardest part was done. On one of the few occasions we got married, I didn't sleep in the same bed as Tracy that night. I went to the bedroom we had set up as a guest room and fell asleep there, although calling it sleep was generous. I broke up with the woman who, a few weeks ago, I considered the light of my life, my soulmate, my everything. Despite everything going on, we were still sleeping in the same bed. I believe neither of us wanted to be the one to make the move. But now it's over, at least in my mind. I got up and showered, and when it was time to get dressed, I very quietly went into the bedroom and grabbed what I needed, being very careful not to wake Tracy and maybe start something. I didn't look to see if she was sleeping. I just took my clothes and left. I went casual, shirt collared, a decent pair of Levi's, and my steel-tipped cowboy boots that I made for myself when we visited our son at his home in Dallas. I left a little earlier than I needed to. I didn't want to be late for this meeting. If I had gotten there earlier, I could always kill time in the cafe, which is what I did. I stood on George and Ginny's porch at 10 o'clock and rang the bell. Ginny, beautiful as always, but very nervous, opened the door. "I'm sorry it ended this way," was all I could say as she leaned over to congratulate me. She didn't answer. She took my hand and led me into the den where George had all of his memorabilia and photographs laid out. George was sitting in his favorite chair, but when we entered, he stood in front of the chair. "Hey, Clark." "Hi, George." Ginny looked downright scared as she left the room. We stood about 6 feet apart, looking at each other. This was a man whom I at one time considered almost an older brother. We were so close. George was 2 years older than me, about the same size, but the gentle life of the last 20 years had added about 30 pounds more to him, about 20 in his round belly. We shared our hopes and dreams with each other. We walked together. We fished together. We hunted together. I was proud to call him my friend, proud of where his refereeing career had taken him. Now, standing in front of me, assessing me with his eyes, he was no longer a friend, but an enemy. the man who stole my love and ruined my life. Suddenly, I got angry. "You keep my wife's heart," I shouted to him. "You also have the opportunity to maintain your egregious image because I promised Tracy that I would never tell anyone about this, and I will not break my promises to this woman." At this point, I took a long, quick step forward with my left leg and then lifted my right leg forward and up, my target being his groin. George reacted even slower than I expected, and my metal-tipped boot hit the target. At that moment, Ginny ran into the room, saw her husband on the floor, and ran to him. He continued to scream in agony, and she really couldn't do anything to console him. She looked at me with pain. I took my cell phone out of my pocket and dialed 911. "There was an accident at Judge George Anderson's house," I said. "We need an ambulance in this place." I turned on my heel and headed for the door, but before I could get there, Ginny grabbed my right arm. I thought that I might have to hit the woman, but instead of hysteria and anger, she had a calm expression on her face. She hugged me tightly and whispered, "Thank you. We know what to do." I hugged her back, left the house, got into the car, and drove home, knowing that the cops wouldn't come for me. Ginny understood this quite well and would explain it to her husband sometime in the future when he had time to think carefully. The drive home was cathartic. I really don't know, but after months of ripping my heart out every day, I felt free. It's funny, but when I finally realized Tracy's betrayal, the pressure on my heart eased, and then I was able to think clearly enough to do what was right for me. This might be the right decision for everyone concerned, but sometimes you just need to take care of yourself. It's what everyone else has been doing for the last 20 years. Why not me now? Yes, I knew that part of me would always love Tracy, but I wasn't going to spend any more time studying this novel. This was not my creation, and it was not my choice. It's time to move forward. When I got home, I went down to the basement, grabbed a couple of suitcases, and went to our bedroom. I walked past Tracy, who was sitting in the family room, and she followed me into the bedroom. "Is that all?" she asked. Just like that. 31 years old and out the door? Tracy, I'm sorry that you're so wrapped up in yourself that you don't see how you've hurt me. How you trampled 24 years of my love with your deception. You don't see it, and you probably never will. I've come to terms with it, and I don't hate you. I don't even hate George, although the poor guy probably thinks so now. I'll make peace with Barry and Katie somewhere in the future. You can make peace with Marissa as quickly as possible. Poor girl is a mess. Sign the papers, Tracy, and let's get this thing done. I will remove the rest of the things from here in the coming days. I don't think we really need to talk anymore. If you have anything to tell me, I will put my lawyer's card on the kitchen table. She was amazed, with tears in her eyes, but without words. I took the suitcases, went downstairs, and put them in the truck of my car. I returned to the house, grabbed a few small items, and left. 31 years old, just like that. I made a mistake. In fact, after 8 months, no one in the family talks to me anymore. I don't care. The official story is that Judge George fell hard on the corner of his ornate desk in his lair, lifted himself up violently, and then did it again as he fell to the floor. The press called it a domestic accident. To be delicate, he received a lot of favorable press. I think this will not prevent him from being shortlisted by the Supreme Court. Tracy signed the divorce papers within a week, and the divorce was granted last week. The house will be sold at auction. Tracy hasn't tried to call me since I left. Barry and Katie didn't call either. I don't think I'll be invited to the family Christmas dinner, no matter where it is. The old man hands over the company to me for the new year when he retires. The agreement is that I have to run the company for 7 years before I can retire as a rich man with a very golden parachute. Then he will find someone to buy the company, and I will also receive 10% of this agreement. I also started going out to social events. I think I mean a date. It will take me a while to remember exactly how to do this. However, word of the divorce spread quickly, and several of our divorced women called to inquire about my interest. In fact, 2 or 3 of Tracy's divorced friends also called, expressing surprise that she would even let me run away. I have to admit, It was good for my ego. A good life awaits me ahead, full of challenges like professional, so personal. I'm working on taking up new hobbies with the extra time I have on personal matters. However, one hobby I have given up is genealogy. I've had enough. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one. Second story. Tony Catalano wasn't the smartest guy in the world, but he was dedicated and hardworking. Mr. B repeatedly rewarded him for his years of good service by giving him increasingly important assignments. This was his biggest assignment yet, and Big Tony was determined to prove that Mr. B's trust in him was justified. He studied the man's photo again. I noticed a black Cadillac Escalade parked against the wall in the dimly lit garage. Tony knew that Arthur Clark owed the boss several $1,000,000 for helping Mr. B with some business deal. Tony has been tasked with reminding Clark, the CEO of a large insurance company, that Mr. B doesn't like it when Clark is a few days late on a payment. Give him the Big Tony growl, then threaten to shoot him in the knees if necessary, but under no circumstances shoot him. These businessmen are a bunch of wimps, and he'll probably start crying and begging you not to hurt him. Remind him to call me tomorrow morning to discuss the late fee. Mr. B instructed Tony. Big Tony studied Arthur C. Clark a little. He knew that Clark was a well-groomed, handsome man who kept himself in good condition, with wavy brown hair and dark brown eyes. He drives a 2022 Escalade and is usually the last one out of the building, which means it will be just the two of them in the parking lot. The penultimate leader had left 10 minutes earlier. Tony watched from behind a column as the door to the garage opened. He had to admit he was impressed by Clark. The man, walking to the car, looked 10 years younger than in his photograph. Tony, 6'3" and 16 pounds, walked toward the second man, approaching him as he approached his car. Mr. B is unhappy. "You're late with your payment," Tony growled at the man, who was looking at him in confusion. "Who? I don't know anyone named Mr. B," the man stammered, eyes wide. "Roar!" Tony growled again, pulling a gun from the waistband of his pants. "Nice try, but if you don't want to limp for the rest of your life..." The day was warm, and Tony was sweating profusely. His right hand was covered in sweat, and he began to lose his grip on the gun, waving it in front of the man. He quickly grabbed it again, but in doing so, accidentally pulled the trigger. An almost deafening roar was heard in the garage. Tony watched in horror as blood gushed from the man's crotch. He screamed and fell back. He didn't die, but Tony didn't have much faith in his chances of survival, as he could see that the blood was still flowing. This wasn't part of the plan, and Tony's specialty wasn't thinking on his feet. Tony didn't see an easy way out. In a state of extreme stress, all he could think about was what he had once heard in a pirate movie: dead men tell no tales. Given the circumstances, it seemed logical. He fired a second shot into the center, killing Clark, and left. Mr. B will not be happy about this mistake. Not knowing much about cars, he didn't notice as he drove out of the garage that the Escalade was a 2020, not a 2022. As Gary Finchel lay dying, his mobile phone rang several times before it went to voicemail. 10 minutes later, it rang again. The dental office of Dr. Alan Siegel and Dr. Victor Washington was busy Friday when two men who soon identified themselves as police officers approached the receptionist and asked to see Dr. Washington. 10 minutes later, a confused, red-faced Dr. Washington was led out in handcuffs. Victor Washington waited for his lawyer to get to the police station before he agreed to be interviewed. "As I told you guys in my office, I barely knew Gary Finchel. He worked in the same company as my wife. I met him at some events at her office, such as Christmas parties and 4th of July barbecues. I don't think I've said more than 100 words to this guy since Tracy came to work with him 4 years ago," Victor said harshly. "What the hell is going on?" "You know that Mr. Finchel was killed last night, right?" asked the male officer. "Yes, Tracy looked very upset when she found out yesterday. I think she went home from work. I guess she's still at home today, Victor said. Both police officers looked at each other and smiled. Victor and his lawyer did not miss this look. What are you driving at? Victor's lawyer asked. The guy was shot in the groin, and you don't think that we will ignore the cuckolding of his mistress, said the policewoman. Victor Washington nearly fell out of his chair. Wait! What? He shouted. Cuckold? My wife? Lover? Are you saying you didn't know that your wife was having an affair with Gary Finchel, and that you weren't the one who shot his balls off? I'm the Easter Bunny and she's the Tooth Fairy, said the male police officer. You've already admitted that you don't have an alibi for the time of the murder, and you clearly have a motive, buddy. Victor fell into his seat. His lawyer whispered something in his ear. No, seriously. I didn't know, Victor said quietly. He looked blankly at the two policemen. I didn't know, he said in their direction. How do you guys know? The officers looked at each other again, but said nothing. You shot his balls off, Dr. Washington. We understand, the male police officer said. How did you find out that my wife was having an affair with Finchel? The dentist asked again. Your wife left 2 messages on his mobile about meeting him around the same time the crime was committed. She admitted to the affair when we pressed her hard. Lying in his prison bed that evening, Victor had plenty of time to think about his situation. Police have not yet charged him, but they have 48 hours before he is due to be released. Victor was a smart man and knew he should be worried about being accused of murdering someone else, but the news that his wife had cheated on him more than offset his worries about being accused of murder. She and Tracy were married for 26 years and had 2 grown children. Just a few hours ago, Victor believed that he and Tracy were going hand in hand. And now? How long did this romance last? Victor wondered. Why did it start? How could he have missed this? Victor was formally charged with murder Sunday night and was denied bail as a flight risk. He noted to himself that his wife had not attempted to contact him since her arrest. Does she really think that he killed her lover? Victor remembered Wednesday evening. As had been customary for the past year, Tracy was supposedly going to dinner and conversation with her best friend Laura. Victor had never thought about this before because he trusted his wife. As usual, she got home around 8, but for some reason she seemed worried and didn't hesitate to let him know. I didn't see any dishes in the sink. Tell me, did you eat Pop-Tarts for dinner again? For God's sake, Vic, you're not disabled. I know you can cook, she hissed at him. Maybe I don't want to cook when I'm alone. I miss you, baby. I hate these bachelorette parties. Oh, come on, she said, heading to the shower. Tracy's impatience with her husband grew the longer her affair with Gary Finchel continued, but it was only recently that Victor noticed a problem between himself and his wife. Tracy loved her husband very much and was certainly not looking for an affair when her friendship with her immediate superior, Finchel, began to grow. After working closely together for several years, Finchel began to see the possibility of something new, more, when she began to openly talk about her personal life. 5 feet 5 inches tall, weight 119 pounds, a curvy woman with shoulder-length straight black hair, Tracy looked 10 years younger than her 48 years, but seemed very concerned as the 50th anniversary approaches. Gary began to slowly feed her ego with compliments. Not that her husband didn't give her compliments, but Tracy seemed especially pleased with the ones that came from another man. Finchel, married with 2 children of his own, was very careful in his seduction of Tracy, and it was almost a year before he slept with another man's wife. Tracy and her partner usually met for sex once or twice a week. They met for lunch several times a week and spent a lot of time in each other's company. Almost everyone who worked in the office knew about their affair, including Arthur C. Clarke. Victor had his lawyer conduct a financial audit on Monday morning because he no longer trusted his wife. That morning, his children visited him in custody and told him that the tabloids were making a big deal out of a molehill. "Cheated hubby shoots wife's lover's nuts," read the headline of one newspaper his son Jared showed him. "Well, I have to give the title writer credit for at least being a smart bastard," Victor said quietly. "It's not funny, Dad." You're in a lot of trouble here, and you're being clever, his daughter Dee whined. I'm sure everything will work out, baby. I didn't kill him. I swear, Victor told his children. Mom seems to think he killed her. We spent the night in the house, and she spent most of the time with us calling you a murderous bastard. She said you couldn't accept that her boyfriend was a better man, a better lover, Jared said. I finally told her to shut up. Jared grinned at his father. He knew that under normal circumstances, Victor would not tolerate his son using insulting words towards his wife, but these were beyond normal circumstances. Victor chuckled in response, causing Jared to sigh in relief. I appreciate you protecting me, Victor said. When did you find out about your mother? Asked his daughter. Only when I was arrested. I keep telling the police that I didn't know, Victor said. I loved your mother, but I would never go to prison because she cheated on me. But I wish I knew who killed that bastard, because I'd like to shake his hand. The children looked at each other in complete surprise. They never thought their father would be honest with them. Of course, the children also never thought that their mother would be dishonest with them. But now it could not be denied that she was dishonest with both their father and them. She tried to hide her infidelity by constantly blaming their father for Finchel's murder. She repeatedly told anyone who would listen that the press was crucifying her for a small affair, while her husband, in her opinion, was being acquitted of murder. Yes, I slept with another man, but your father killed another man. All this damn press cares about is the sexual aspect, she complained to the children. Well, if my father killed a man, it was only because you had sex with him. It's all about sex, Jared snapped. When state police found a 9mm pistol with the decomposed remains of a large man upstate a few months later, they were immediately suspicious. 2 days after that, a ballistics test on the gun showed a match with a high-profile case that occurred this spring, a case that the media dubbed the betrayed husband. It's not every day that a cuckold husband blows his wife's lover's balls off. The remains were identified as those of Tony Big Tony Catalano, a low-level mafia member affiliated with George Barill's gang. After extensive cross-checking, state and local police were unable to find any connection between Catalano and the man jailed for the murder of Gary Finchel, Dr. Victor Washington. The connection to the jilted husband case again excited the media, and they joined the police in trying to find a connection between the mafia and the insurance company. The police won the race, finally identifying Arthur Clark as the link, but it took an eagle-eyed video technician from one of the city's news stations to piece the pieces together. Robbie Comstock of KRNT News was looking through photographs of the main defendants in both cases when he noticed Gary Finchel's close physical resemblance to his boss, Clark. He then remembered that both men drove black Escalades, with Finchel's car being 2 years older. What if Big Tony shot Finchel by accident, mistaking him for Clark? Comstock asked the two investigating officers in an off-the-record meeting. What if Finchel getting his balls shot off was just a weird coincidence? Further investigation led police to believe the video technician's theory. Several insurance company employees noted that there were jokes in the office that Finchel's grooming and choice of car clearly did not please his boss. George Barill was not very happy with Big Tony when he reported that evening that his mission had gone awry and Clark was dead. The mob boss always tried hard to keep his legendary bad temper in check, but in his business it wasn't always possible. I told you not to shoot, you fucking idiot! What exactly did you not understand? Beryl barked at the cowardly man. You shot him twice and killed him. I screwed up big time, Mr. B. I'm really, really sorry, Tony said remorsefully. The pistol began to slip out of my hand. I intercepted him and he shot. He was bleeding profusely. I knew he was going to die, and I thought if I just left him there, he might talk. So I finished him off. Beryl thought for a few seconds before answering. Have Andrew take you to our house on East 9th and sit with you for a few days until we figure out how to get you out of town for a while. He will keep you out of sight and feed you well, Beryl said. Thank you, Mr. B. I really appreciate it. I'm very sorry that this happened. Okay. Move on, Tony, Beryl said, patting the large man on the shoulder and leading him to the door. Tony's fate was sealed when it turned out that the victim was not Arthur Clark, but one of his employees. Clark left the office for a doctor's appointment earlier that day. "This may not be the worst thing that can happen," Barrel told his chief assistant, Frankie Donatello. "This will definitely show Mr. Clark that we are not to be trifled with. But damn, I always liked Tony, that big stupid idiot." "You know what needs to be done." Donatello nodded and left the room. After Finchel's murder, Tracy's life fell apart. She had no idea that her husband knew anything about her affair, and was completely shocked that her gentle, loving husband could kill another person. She suddenly knew real fear, but she took comfort in the fact that the police had arrested him and was being held without bail. While her children were shocked by Tracy's infidelity, she played up their father's murder of her lover to distract attention from the issue of infidelity. It would have worked better if it weren't for the media digging up a story about a cuckolded husband killing his wife's lover, making it front-page news. "Hell, you'd think I was the first woman in town to leave her husband," Tracy whined to her colleague Liz one day over lunch, about 2 weeks after the murder. "According to the damn press, I'm the second coming of the whore of Babylon." "Well, you must admit, it's not entirely usual for your jealous husband to shoot off your lover's balls and kill him," Liz said, giggling, looking at Tracy's face. "Sorry," she muttered quickly. "Almost everyone here knew that you two were tumbling, but how serious is it, Tracy? Did you two love each other?" "You know, I loved Vic, but Gary and I were turning into someone. Although I think we will never know who we could have become. I can't believe Victor was able to kill someone." "I guess you never really know a person, right?" Tracy said. "I think not," Liz said quietly. The week before, Liz had been with Tracy and several other colleagues at Gary's funeral. She saw Gary's wife give Tracy dirty looks several times and noticed Tracy had her eyes downcast but appeared to be quietly crying throughout the service. She knew Tracy must be a little worried that Gary's widow might get out of hand. Fortunately, nothing bad happened. Tracy tried to stay in the background, away from the widow. Having never been to prison, Victor could not believe how amazing it was to feel like a free man after more than 4 months of imprisonment. "Oh, damn, Lance! Even the air is sweeter, I swear!" he shouted in jubilation as he walked out of prison with his lawyer. The city's district attorney released Victor and dropped the charges against him when police determined that his wife's lover, Gary Finchel, had been shot by another man, Big Tony Catalino. Lance Weatherman took his client to the home he had shared with his wife Tracy for the past 15 years. Tracy was at work as it was barely past noon. He and Lance walked into the house, which looked exactly the same as the last time he saw it, Victor thought. As Lance watched, Victor slowly walked throughout the house, freely touching walls, furniture, even trinkets, as a blind person would. "God, how I miss this place, even knowing what I know now," Victor whispered. Victor walked over to his well-stocked liquor cabinet, knowing that Tracy had never drunk hard liquor, and the cabinet had probably not been touched since he was arrested. There were at least 25 bottles of liquor in various stages of filling. The holiday calls for a single malt," Victor enthused, taking out a half-full bottle of 12-year-old Glenmorangie and pouring glasses for Lance and himself. "Thanks for your help, Lance, and thanks for being there when things were at their lowest," he said. "I know it wasn't just for the salary." He and Lance sipped their drinks in silence. Lance drummed his fingers on the manila folder on the table. "Why do you think she didn't file for divorce while I was in prison?" Victor asked. "In the beginning, probably, because there was so much crap, especially with the hype in the press and everything else. Then she probably just decided that you would do it yourself from prison," Lance replied. "The kid said she was sure I killed her lover and that she hated me for it, so I guess I'm shocked she hasn't done it yet," Victor said. "When she returns home, she will be shocked. Maybe with everything that's going on, she's changed her mind and wants to stay with you. Gary is dead. The kids are mad at her. She's practically a real Cruella de Vil. As they say, the best of the worst," Lance said. Returning home, Tracy didn't recognize the car parked in her driveway. At first she thought it was another reporter looking for an interview, but then she realized whoever it was already inside her house. She dialed 911 and gave the dispatcher all the information. 2 minutes later, 2 uniformed police officers entered Washington's house, joined by Tracy. "My God! What are you doing here?" she shouted to Victor, and both officers raised their weapons. Both Victor and Lance raised their arms above their heads. "Stop! Stop! Stop! I live here. I'm Vic Washington. A few hours ago, I was released from prison. The prosecutor even apologized to me," Victor said. "Is it true? I'm his lawyer." "He was cleared of all charges," Lance said. One of the police officers called and confirmed this statement. Tracy was shocked. "The asshole was just a victim in the story of the poor idiot, Tracy," Victor said. "He just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Besides, why would I even go to jail because of your scruffy ass? You think too highly of yourself." Tracy lowered her head, blushing deeply. The 2 police officers were about to leave when Lance asked them to testify to something. He handed Tracy a manila envelope and told her she had been served. "I don't think I want a divorce, Vic," Tracy rasped. "I actually thought you killed Gary, but since you didn't, maybe there is hope for us." "Are you fucking delirious, woman? You cheated on me. Forget everything else. Forget even the fact that your betrayal cost me more than 4 months in prison." "4 months!" Victor shouted. "You told the children that he was the best man, the best lover." "Well, I don't need any scraps from Gary Finchell's table." Vic wasn't sure he could ever thank Alan Siegel, his business partner, and his wife Marilyn for the support they gave him during his wrongful imprisonment and divorce. The Siegels visited Victor in prison at least once every 2 weeks, and Alan worked 50 and 60 hours a week, taking on Victor's patients while he was in prison. To get used to his life, Victor took a week off and then returned to work. He was amazed at how well people treated him, many of whom went out of their way to wish him well. Several women even came up and gave him notes with their names and phone numbers on them. He was embarrassed, but still took them, not wanting to offend anyone. He couldn't get used to the power of the press and social media. His children, Alan and Marilyn, commented on how sympathetic the press was to him while making Tracy and Gary look like villains. "What's going on, Vic? 2 years have passed. Your brain works, but not your heart," said Marilyn Siegel, taking Victor's hand in the expensive restaurant where they were sitting. Victor looked up at Marilyn. Over the past few years, he and Alan, as well as his daughter Dee, had been his rock. Marilyn, in particular, made Victor her personal project, often fussing over him like a mother hen. She looked at him and waited patiently. He considered giving her a banal answer, but common sense prevailed. "Nothing will be the same again, Mar," said Victor. "I can talk to women. I can get them into bed, but there's nothing, no connection. I understand that sex can exist without love, but not for me. Vic, there will be no connection on the first date, or on the second, or on the third. Remember when you fell in love with Tracy? You've been dating her for a long time. You got to know each other. This didn't happen overnight. You are wrong to expect that the one will just magically appear in front of you. After all, you date a woman once or twice, and then move on. It doesn't work that way," says Marilyn. "But I'm 52, not 22, Mar. I have no time." "Time for love?" she interrupted. "Jesus, dumbass, it doesn't happen faster just because you get older. And if it doesn't happen, that's okay too, but you have to try first." Marilyn chuckled and then looked questioningly at her friend. She didn't realize it, but she might have been the only person Victor listened to. Coincidentally, Marilyn and Alan began hosting small get-togethers at their home every few months, and they always managed to find a few single women to attend with Victor. Victor was not so stupid as not to understand what Marilyn was doing, and he noted to Alan that Marilyn had very good taste in women. "You better watch this, buddy, because if she ever leaves you, she'll have a whole host of beautiful women to choose from," Victor said. "Don't think I didn't notice," said his friend. When Victor noticed her, she was reaching up to light one of the 4 mosquito torches that lined the edges of the expansive Siegel veranda. In truth, he noticed her ass in tight jeans and a large area of smooth skin on her back, as when she stretched, her top lifted up. When she turned, he stood silently, a smile playing on his lips. until he realized that she was looking directly at him. "Ah," was all that came out of his confused, drugged brain. "They tell me this often," she said confidently. "Eh?" Vic's brain finally caught up with his ears. He finally looked at the woman's face and realized that she was Asian American, with large eyes and straight, shoulder-length black hair. She saw recognition finally appear on his face. "I did not have—" "Kidding." "I'm kidding," the woman said. "You are not the first who cannot understand for a long time that I am Asian. It usually takes men a while to look me in the face." No. "I'm not like that at all," Vic protested, a little too loudly, as several people turned towards the couple. She motioned with her hands for him to lower his voice. He blushed deeply. "Dr. Vic Washington," he said, extending his hand for a handshake. "I'm Al's business partner. A long time ago." "Yes, thanks to the news, I know who you are," the woman said, catching Vic's grimace. "I'm Lainey Brand, basically a friend of Marilyn's. I didn't mean to offend you with my comment about the news. I think for you this is about the same as for guys not looking me in the eyes when they talk to me." "Fair enough," Vic answered. "How about we have a drink and then I'll talk to you, looking you in the face, and you can pretend like you don't think I'm pathetic, making a fool out of the whole country." It was the woman's turn to click her tongue when she realized that she must have been as obvious as Vic was when he was staring at her large breasts. Okay," she said, giving him a shy smile. They talked for the next hour until Victor realized that he had monopolized the woman. He apologized for his social awkwardness and said he would allow her to mingle with the other guests. She told him that she enjoyed his company, after which they went their separate ways and began to communicate with others, although Victor secretly kept her in his sight for the rest of the evening. "You know, if you keep looking over your shoulder to keep an eye on her, your neck will hurt," Alan told him at one point. "Why don't we switch places so you can look at her directly over my shoulder? This will be much more convenient." Yes, muttered Vic. "And I thought I was acting so cool, so cunning. Just so you know, buddy, drooling isn't cool or smart." "What do you want to know?" According to Alan, Lainey is 3 years younger than Vic. She is Marilyn's longtime friend and works as a reference librarian. Her 20-year marriage ended when she caught her husband cheating with a colleague. She has been single for the past few years. "How can a woman with such an appearance remain single for so long?" Vic asked. "Is she a diva or something?" Wow. "From what Mar says, she's just a peach," Alan said. "But picky, don't consider it necessary to marry a second time, especially if it's to the wrong guy." Understood. Lainey and Vic did not communicate again for the rest of the evening, and she slipped away without giving Vic her phone number. But he wasn't worried because he knew that Marilyn had it. Vic waited 2 days before calling Marilyn. He didn't need to tell her why he was calling. "You, sir, have amazing restraint," Marilyn said, instead of starting with the usual pleasantries. "Or you're an idiot." Vic was somewhat taken aback. Marilyn rarely swore and almost never swore. "I was trying to be cool and not look desperate," Victor said. "Did you really greet her with the word, Marilyn mocked. "Then why should you worry about looking cool in front of her? You ruined everything with one little 2-letter word. Or maybe it's because of the saliva." Victor was glad that Marilyn couldn't see how red he was. "So are you going to call her right now, or are you going to spend 2 days debating the right and wrong way to do this?" asked Marilyn. "You're a master debater. We all know that," Marilyn giggled. "You always make funny jokes, Mar," said Vic. "Can you give me your number now?" "Of course, but remember that I already told you that you need to build relationships and not wait for them to come to you," said Marilyn. The very next day, Victor invited Lainey to dinner, and the following Friday to a movie. He invited her to a very prestigious restaurant and then let her choose the movie. "So are you trying to buy favor with this restaurant?" Lainey asked. "No. To be honest, I didn't know that," Victor answered. "I just didn't want to take an Asian woman to a Chinese, Japanese, or Korean restaurant. Well, I'm 3/4 Chinese, but it was from that remaining quarter that I got this," she said, straightening up to her full height and gently swaying her breasts. "I know. When you think about a Chinese woman, you imagine a gymnast, right? And definitely not a size 5. Victor blushed, although he didn't know exactly why. He guessed that he was not used to a big-breasted woman talking so openly about her gifts. When he looked up from the table, she was looking straight at him with a slight smirk. "Sorry, I may be a little blunt. Didn't Marilyn warn you?" "Actually, no. And while I'm sure she always makes sure there are a couple of single women present at every meeting, she never tells me anything about them. He says I have to do a little work myself." Lainey laughed cheerfully. As the relationship progressed, Victor discovered that Lainey had no problem laughing heartily when she was having fun. "This is my girl." Lainey was delighted. Vic also learned that Lainey is not shy about crying when she's in the mood, such as at the end of a movie she chose. Apparently, her father died of cancer, as did the father of the leading lady in the film. Victor didn't know about this until Lainey filled him in later, when the couple went to a restaurant to order a late dessert and drink coffee. Victor waited 2 days to call Lainey and set up another date. She readily agreed to the following weekend. At the end of the 5th date, the couple ended up in Victor's bed. About a month later, Marilyn went out to lunch with Lainey. It was only 2 minutes of pleasantries before she asked how things were going between Lainey and Victor. And how could his ex-wife be so stupid? "He's handsome, well-built, a gentleman, and lots of other things," Lainey said, a pinkish tint appearing on her face and neck. "Hell, he even looks me in the eye. Well, most of the time. Except when I wear this red silk dress. But I would commit suicide if at least one man in this dress did not spend most of the evening looking at my breasts." Both women smiled. Dr. Victor Washington could well claim that he was already married at this point. In reality, the wedding took place only 6 months later. The announcement in the local newspaper of the wedding of Dr. Victor Washington should not have received more than a minor mention, let alone such a large article that it appeared in newspapers across the country. The media simply could not let the wedding of the jilted husband pass without a full review of this whole sordid story. "Damn bastards!" George Beryl shouted over the phone to Arthur Clark, throwing the newspaper across the room. "Every time one of them does something, another article appears in the newspapers about the abandoned husband, and then the press starts snooping around again. That traitor still works for you, right?" "Yes," Clark replied, not understanding where this conversation was going. "Bury this bitch," Beryl hissed. "Send her to a place where the press will never find her." 2 weeks later, a very disgruntled Tracy Washington was running a 2-person firm's office in Paducah, New York. The incessant press coverage made her unemployable anywhere else on a decent salary, and although she was doing well financially after the divorce, with no family or social life to speak of, work was all she had left. Vic did not expect that when he came to host the reception on Monday morning, there would be a note from George Beryl in the middle of his desk. The note was sealed, and Vic didn't know who sent it until he read it. It was an invitation, if Beryl's request could be called an invitation, to meet the mafia boss in his office for lunch that same day at noon. The note said that the meeting would be just for the two of them. Vic had never met Beryl in person, but like many, he knew of the alleged connection between Beryl and the death of the man who cuckolded him. He wondered why he had been called, but of course he had no intention of ignoring the invitation. After a thorough search, Vic was led into Beryl's office by the mountain man, who, it seemed, was not having a good day. He was led to a table off to the side, already set with what appeared to be a sumptuous lunch of Italian dishes. Beryl introduced himself, shook the dentist's hand, and invited him to sit down. "It's just us here, and this office is checked daily for bugs, so we can both talk freely," Beryl said. "I owe you an apology in some way. As I'm sure you know, I changed the course of your life. It was a mistake of epic proportions, I assure you. It shouldn't have affected you in any way. Damn, I didn't even know who you were, who your wife was." "Mr. Beryl, if I may interrupt you," Victor said, puzzling Beryl with a beaming smile. "There is no need to apologize to me. In fact, You have done me a great favor." Beryl looked at Victor as if he had grown a second head. Victor stopped, took a sip from the glass of 15-year-old Pappy Van Winkle bourbon that Beryl had poured, and smiled again. Really amazing," Victor said, while Beryl glared at him, waiting for an explanation. "Oh yeah, sorry. So, like I said, like I told the cops, I had no idea my wife was cheating on me. And you not only warned me about this, but you also did what I could only dream of when you eliminated her lover. And the groin shot is just a wonderful cherry on the cake. God, I hope your guy waited a little while before putting that second bullet in him. 4.5 months in prison is worth his death. So thank you, and I'm completely sincere. Well, I think if you don't mind, then I'll stop feeling guilty. For Hilth, both men nodded to each other, finished their glasses and slammed them on the table. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one. 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 Listening